Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to another episode of Coaching Outdoors. Today I am flying solo. It is only me, Anna Marie. Unfortunately, Paul had a little bit of an incident involving a 35-kilo black Labrador and a style. So unfortunately, he is kind of resting up. And it's only going to be myself in conversation today, but sending him speedy best wishes and hoping that he will be back to join us soon. So today we are bridging the gap over to America. We are always on a mission to hunt out coaches and interesting people in the world of nature from around the world. And our guest today is Jared Hanley. And I am not even going to try to explain his background or the project that he is involved within, and I will very much invite him to describe it in a couple of sentences. We've got time to dive into the details later.
Well, thanks for having me, Anne-Marie. Yeah, Jared Hanley. I am one of the co-founders of NatureQuant, which is a company that quantifies nature. And personally, my background is in tech, corporate finance, and outdoor endurance athletics.
How NatureQuant tech, and I can imagine some people are going to be listening in a little bit confused as to, well, what's this got to do with coaching and how we're going to integrate that, but we will get there. We always start off with a question which our guests really seem to enjoy, and it gives them the opportunity to kind of cast their minds back to the past. So without further ado, what is your earliest memory of being outdoors? And why do you enjoy being outside so much?
Oh, wow. Well, most of my memories from a very young age are outside. I mean, I really spent the vast majority of my childhood outdoors. I kind of lived in the woods in the Pacific Northwest, and the outdoors was my playground. I think specifically it was playing in a creek that was on our property, investigating crawdads, these little crab-like creatures that were fascinating to me. I don't know how old I was, probably under 5 for sure.
And I always enjoy, it's almost like a bit of time travel back as to what was it that kind of sparked that initial relationship with the outdoors, because that can be the start of so much moving forwards. And almost kind of going from that point to where you are now, well, what is your backstory? What key milestones were there along the way that ultimately resulted in NatureQuant and the work that you do now?
Yeah, I think, my story is probably similar to most adults, and maybe even to society at large, in that, I spent a lot of my childhood outside. The wilderness was my playground. And then as I grew older, I spent more and more time indoors, and then eventually became a professional in a very, high speed, high pressure kind of career in offices in front of screens all the time, and didn't have any contact with nature. And I found that I needed nature more than ever to get outside and kind of reset my mind and kind of reset my just well-being and focus and creativity. And I think that's similar to, kind of what's happening in society at large. We mostly are now living in cities, mostly inside. Many people aren't getting outdoors, and it's needed now more than ever. So I think, my story is not unique in that regard, other than over the last decade or so, I've really dove into the research around the health benefits of nature exposure, to the point where I've obviously launched a company to study exactly that and promote time outside with intention for health.
And this is what very much caught my attention as I was perusing LinkedIn, as you do. And that was where I kind of stumbled across your profile, which then led to your website, which then led to different articles. And this idea of NatureQuant, and we've got 2 separate strands, and picking them, we've got the NatureDose app and then the NatureScore NatureScore. So, first up, like, where did the whole concept come from? And then how did they then develop?
Yeah. Well, so I'm a data scientist, and so I spent a lot of time thinking about data and numbers. And I actually was on a hike in the woods many years ago when Bitcoin was blowing up. And Bitcoin, as we all know, is just a system to track unique numbers. And at the time, it was worth, I don't know how many trillions of dollars. And I was fascinated by the power of numbers to create societal influence, and in this case, trillions of dollars of value. And meanwhile, I was just surrounded by this beautiful nature, and I was receiving tremendous benefit from it. I just really enjoyed that time outside, but I noticed that nature didn't have a number. And I felt by quantifying nature, giving nature a number, not just nature that's statically like where are the trees in the parks, but nature exposure for an individual might change the way society uses nature or thinks about nature and all the benefits it provides us. So I just felt like nature needed a number, and that was really the inspiration for NatureQuant.
Wow. And I could almost anticipate some people listening in going like, but you can't reduce nature to a number. Like, there's so much more to it. That's just wrong almost.
Yeah. It is incredibly ironic, pairing technology with nature, first of all, but also just giving it a number, because it's the nature is so diverse and dynamic. How can you distill it to a 5, for example? I can get into a little bit of the details of the way we do it, and we're not claiming to capture all of the essence that nature provides, but we do have now statistical models that show very specifically how certain natural environments or certain types of nature exposure influence our health.
Okay. Please continue. Tell us more.
Yeah, so let me, I'll just back up and kind of talk a little bit about kind of the main systems we've created within NatureQuant. The first is something we call NatureScore, which is really like a Google Maps for nature, if you will. So we aggregate, dozens and dozens of what are called remote sensing technologies. So think about like satellite images that are super high res, where we can count where every tree is, see where the impervious surfaces are. We also have all the polygons for parks and bodies of water. We know all the building footprints and the highways. We know other human modifications like air pollution, light pollution, noise pollution. And so you get this giant data set that gives us really precise location intelligence. So we really kind of know where the built environment is versus the natural environment and the types of nature. Is it sand? Is it a forest? Is it a river? So once you have that location intelligence, and then you know where people spend their time and what prevalence of diseases we see. So where are their cancer pockets? Where is longevity just longer or shorter? You can run a machine learning process between the presence of nature and the incidence of health outcomes. And that gives you an association between those two. So broadly, it's an environmental determinant of health. And the one that we're focusing on is nature. And we continually find that living within proximity to certain natural environments tends to be tightly associated with better health. Meaning, if you have a bunch of Douglas fir trees around you, your risk for asthma is lower, for example. But there's many other things that we find that are associated between the presence of nature and positive health outcomes. And in essence, that's what NatureScore does, is it tells us how the natural environment is influencing public health in that location.
Interesting. And I'm almost, my mind's casting back to a former guest that we had on who spoke a lot around blue health, Lizzie Labista. So listeners, if you've not checked out her episode, it might be worth just going back through our back catalogue and having a dive into that. And it would be interesting to note your something around blue health, and what have you noticed within the statistics?
Yeah, so I'll just say it's a very complicated web. Humans are complicated and the environment is complicated, right? So it's very hard to say, right, being next to a lake means X, Y, and Z, right? We're trying to parse apart all of these complicated elements and why nature seems to bestow better health. I mean, we know it cleans the air, right? We know it tends to have influence on activity levels. So people who have access to a park are more active. We know being around a biodiverse environment improves your immune system. So there's there's all these different things happening in unison, and which is why we need these big machine learning models to really parse apart mechanisms of action, like what specific pieces of that environment are causing those health outcomes. And I don't think anyone can say with confidence it's the trees or it's the water, because it's really just not that simple. I think there's a lot of things happening in unison that we're trying to parse apart. But, being near water certainly makes people happier. I mean, we see that repeatedly. Being in a forest improves your natural killer cells, which are part of the immune system. So we see that repeatedly. So there's just a lot happening within, this complicated ecosystem that we all live in. Not to mention our behaviors, which is our second product, the NatureDose. Like, you may live next to a forest, but you never go outside, so it doesn't really matter. And that's what our mobile app does.
So just to talk a little bit more to that. So then NatureScore, NatureDose app, how do they connect and what is the benefit?
Yeah. So NatureDose is a mobile app that passively tracks your time indoors, outdoors, and then when you're outside, we look at how nature-rich your environment is. So then we go back to that map, the NatureScore map, to understand what are you around when you're outside. Are you in like a busy, dense urban environment? Are you in a park? Are you near a lake? And the idea behind NatureDose is a lot like the 10,000 step count that became very popular with Fitbit, is that just by setting a goal for yourself, saying, I want to spend 2 hours a week outside every week, and kind of working towards that goal with intention, dramatically changes behaviors. So many people don't realize that they're spending like 97% of their lives inside or in vehicles. We're just really not going outside at all. And so until you start tracking that and kind of see what your behaviors are truly like, it's just harder to affect change. So just monitoring your behavior, thinking about how much time you're spending outside, particularly in natural environments, we think is important. And we now have this NatureDose technology to do it passively. So it's not even, any effort. You download the app, you set your goal, and, you don't have to check it all the time, but you check in a couple times a week and see, have I spent adequate time outside this week? Mm-hmm. And we're using NatureDose in a ton of clinical trials right now with really promising results. So we're finding that people that get outside more are happier, right? They just report better mood. They're sleeping better. Over the long run, we're going to see if they are sick less often or have less cancer. So it's going to be a really valuable research tool, because historically we really had no sense of how much time people were spending indoors or outdoors. And this app allows us to do that.
Mm-hmm. And it's fascinating, and thank you so much for sharing. And within this podcast, we're always interested to get this. Coaching is very much a science; it's an art. What's the evidence? What's it based in? And yes, within our business culture at the moment, we do love quantification. And as you mentioned, 10,000 steps, it's ingrained now. Most people, myself included. Mm-hmm. And it really, our reality, our self-awareness can be so mismatched to the truth. And actually, by bringing this kind of figure in, I'm really curious to see where it's going to go over the next kind of few years, and how that can then really ultimately kind of create change on a wider scale. But bringing it back, and we're always curious around challenges. And challenges that you might have faced or be facing at the moment. What were they? And then how have you overcome them?
Well, speaking for NatureQuant, there's a number of challenges. I mean, from a technical perspective, it's very, very difficult to aggregate all of these remote sensing technologies to really know where are the buildings, right? Where are the trees? But, we were able to successfully do that. And then from the mobile app perspective, the indoor-outdoor detection is really unique. As far as we know, there's no other mobile app out there that does what we do, which is simply monitor the minutes you're spending inside versus outside. Because it's hard to do. You need to know where all the building footprints are. You need to know where the user is, well, essentially the user's phone. And, aggregate all the sensor data that you can to make an intelligent determination of indoor and outdoor. So that was much harder than we expected. I mean, it took years of engineering to get that done, and it's not perfect, but it's pretty good. So that was hard from an engineering perspective. But I think more broadly, our biggest challenge is just raising awareness around the importance of being outside. A lot of people hear what we're doing. They're like, why should I care if I ever go outside? I'm perfectly happy indoors. I'm entertained. I have food. I'm comfortable. I don't need the outdoors. And so, that's where our science hopefully will come along and prove to people that actually you do need to spend a certain amount of time outside, or you're just not going to, you're going to have lower levels of well-being. So public awareness, because I think the concept of going outside intentionally for your health is not well known.
And I think when you're talking with like-minded people who have an affinity for the outdoors and nature, it's mind-blowing that, for me, nature connection is a part of my day. If I've been inside all day, I'm cooped up. I'm like going up the walls. I need to get out on a physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual level. And how, as a human species, we've got ourselves into this sedentary, confined situation from an evolution perspective is just absolutely mind-blowing. And yes, technology, friend or foe, it's more complex than that. And it kind of within the coaching world as well, kind of technology, how can it be used? There's the whole conversation around AI. Will the robots come and steal all our jobs as coaches? And it's almost, okay, well, how can we be more conscious about this? Because there is a time and a place. And I know that, health coaches, for example, have very much used 10,000 steps as a real tool on a day-to-day basis to encourage people to move. So again, it comes into the integration. It comes down to the kind of the application. And, in a way, it would be interesting to hear your thoughts, like speaking to our listeners who are predominantly, coaches working in a variety of different areas, from from leadership to health to sports, across the board. How could your technology support their work?
Yeah, well, first I'll say, I do think it's important to quantify things as a data scientist, obviously. I'm going to say that. But also telling someone that you're monitoring something, just telling them that changes the behavior. It's called the Hawthorne effect. I mean, you may hear people say, just write down what you eat. I don't care what your diet is, just write it all down. And then once someone knows that they're creating a log of their diet, they change behaviors. And so simply by having our app on your phone and creating a log of how often you're getting outside is maybe enough to change behaviors, because people will start thinking about, wow, I haven't been outside in 3 days. I need to go for a walk outside. So I think, just setting that goal, monitoring it, hopefully will change behaviors. And the second thing I'll say about our app is it's passive. There's a lot of activity trackers out there where, you can log your runs and log your bike rides or whatever. And it's a manual process. Every time you go outside, you start it and then you stop it when you get home. That's not how our app works. It's not intended to get you into the app and be part of the attention economy. It just works passively in the background. So you can just check in when you want and see where you are. You don't have to constantly start and stop it every time you go outside. So we feel like it allows that motivation to be created without interfering with our day-to-day lives or really sucking us into technology more, because part of our mission is to get people off screens and outside.
So there's none of the Facebook, Strava, Instagram, TikTok. I was outside in nature for 5 hours today. Kudos to me. And getting comments and likes from other people. It's very much for that your use. And then I've not seen, I understand the app's only available in North America at the moment. Though kind of going into it, like what data as a user do you actually have sight of?
Yeah, so I mean, really the data we create is minutes inside, minutes outside, and then a subset of your outside time is this concept of NatureDose, which is an examination of the quality of your outdoor environment. So how much, how many trees are you near, parks, bodies of water, etc. So NatureDose is really time outside exposed to nature, which we are now studying, because we do know, like, sitting in a busy, hectic city doesn't provide the same benefits as going to a park. And so we think it's important to delineate outside time between nature-rich environments and nature-deficient environments. And so it's really those three stats. That's the core of what the app creates. And that can then be used to pair to other data. So if you have a smartwatch or, an Oura Ring or one of those smart wearables, we can look at, okay, you spent an hour outside this morning and you slept great, right? And then we do that over the course of a year, and we can really see how different behaviors can improve our mood, improve our sleep, improve our health broadly.
And this is where I'm really, this whole idea around mood and sleep and health, and then bringing that into the coaching conversation. I do some work for an organization that is extremely holistic, and they integrate physical activity, they integrate recovery, mental energy, and actually, when you're nailing the sleep, when you're getting that quality sleep, for example, you're showing up at work, you're far more able to be creative, you're more innovative, you're problem solving, the way that you manage your relationships with others is like at a totally different level. And actually then what influence nature has on that as well. And I'm sure, a lot of people have been out for a walk and they've had that spark of an idea. And ultimately, within coaching, when we're out working with our clients in the outdoor space, that's that element of creativity that you really want to be supporting as well. And I get it, like accessibility to like rich nature can be difficult, particularly if you're in an inner city area. There is a bit of a gap between whether people can afford to, even travel to rich nature. So that is another kind of element that we need to be mindful of.
Well, that's a whole nother side of our business, actually. So the NatureScore maps that I was talking about, we deliver that to cities, governments, nonprofits, and they use that information to identify those nature deficient communities. So we'll go to a city, show them what we call like a heat map of their entire city and say, look, these areas are nature deficient. You should invest in, urban tree canopy here. This is where you should develop your next park, because the people that live in that zone have a harder time accessing or just being in proximity to nature broadly. And so that's another use of kind of our mapping tools, is just to help build better cities.
And it's really interesting to hear about the application of it. And I'd love to just dive a little bit more into this, and whether you are able to share some stories and case studies around people who've used the app and how that has specifically changed their behavior, whether that is an individual, confidentiality respected completely, or whether it's a group, or whether it's just some further kind of patterns and trends that you're maybe still in the process of researching.
Well, I mean, we have a lot of personal stories, but I think more broadly, we have a bunch of clinical trials underway showing that people going outside just report better mood. And as I mentioned, we are tracking things like sleep, heart rate variability, resting heart rate. All those things seem to trend positively when you've been outside. Among our users, it's kind of interesting. We do have hardcore athletes who are outside for like 1,000 minutes a week or more, competing to have the most NatureDose per week. I think that's one, a certain type of person that likes the challenge of like just being deep in the wilderness often. But we also have a lot of people who are just trying to get an hour or two a week outside and just kind of meeting those goals and finding that it just helps them kind of, clear their minds, de-stress, and they use it just more as a meditative tool than kind of an active outdoor athletic pursuit kind of thing. So it's pretty broad, I would say, our user group and kind of the way that the tool's being applied right now. I mean, I can just say personally, I've found, and I obviously log all of my biomarkers as well as my time outside, that when I'm outside more, I seem to be more productive. I definitely am sleeping better. I think I'm more creative as well. So, I think different people take different things from time outside.
And just hearing you describe that, it connects back. We've literally just had Gary Pratt on, who he's an entrepreneur creative, and has just published a book called Outside Thinking. And he has this concept around 23 minutes a day, 3 hours a week, 3 days every quarter, and that exposure to nature. So almost like his work, your work, just it's human beings and numbers, like our brains do like them.
Yeah, we do.
Like distilling it down, so it's that rational bit, and then so the rest of our embodied state and that maybe more spiritual side, if that's your thing, how do you then kind of satisfy that need? But that's what I love about the space, is there is room for everything. And I think there's a need for both sides of it as well.
There's definitely a need. I mean, we can tell you now, basically among our cohort, the average time that people are spending, this is mostly in the US so far, are spending outside is like 4 or 5% of their lives. So they're inside 90, 96, 95% of their lives are indoors or in vehicles. And when you think about that compared to our evolutionary history, where we're outside 99.9% of the time, it's just a dramatically new lifestyle and a new environment that I'm not sure our psychology or even physiology is well suited for. It's just such an abrupt change for a species that, you know, evolved outside to now be inside all the time in front of screens. It's just very different. And so I think we just need to understand the impacts of that kind of new lifestyle and how to correct for those.
It's like we're living in this massive big social experiment, and we're not
Yes.
even aware that we're in it, and we're not quite sure what is going to happen. So, you know, the response that you've had, you know, you've had coverage in the Wall Street Journal, outside magazines, you were awarded Fast Company's Next Big Thing in Tech award in 2022. So congratulations for that. And, you know, it is, you know, I reiterate, great to see that you are getting that coverage, because ultimately that is what is helping spread the message. So looking ahead, what is your vision for the future?
Yeah, I mean, I think we want NatureDose to be the next big behavioral metric, if you will. You know, you think about the things that people are tracking now, you know, if you have like an Apple Watch, it's, you know, standing time, steps, various people, you know, track different things. We think time outdoors is a very important aspect of well-being and human health. And it should become a kind of a common metric that people are thinking about and optimizing. So I'd love NatureDose to just be in most phones. You know, when you get your phone, it has a little step counter. It may have NatureDose, or be in the Apple Watch, right? Or any other health and fitness suite. So, you know, the Google Fit suite or the Samsung Health. We think time outside is really important for well-being. In fact, we don't think it. We're now getting really robust data to support that, on top of like 50 years of research in this space before we even existed. So I think it's pretty well solidified that this is an important thing for people to think about and utilize to improve health. And so we just want to raise awareness around that and get it in all of these other kind of health and wellness platforms.
And at the moment, you're North America based. What about global reach? When's the spread?
We are working on it. We are we'll hopefully be able to launch in Europe and UK soon, as well as Australia, and then maybe followed by Asia. It's you know, we need a lot of data. We need to know literally where every building footprint is, and just to aggregate that data and process it intelligently and quickly is a big engineering lift, but we're working on it. I suspect we'll be at least in Europe in the next you know, 12 months.
I'm sure some listeners will be keeping their eyes peeled. We have people from around the world, though predominantly, you know, I'm UK based, and so's Alex and Paul, who've been co-hosting. So yeah, UK listeners, patience, we will get there, and I'm sure we will be the first to know. We'll be watching with beady eyes. So for our listeners, and clearly you've got your app, which we can't access yet, but what other resources would you recommend to our community to, you know, deepen their coaching practice or their connection to nature?
Well, I don't know if it's resources, but I would just say spend some time looking at the scientific literature around the impacts of time in nature, because they are profound and they're almost instant. I mean, we really have at this point hundreds of interventional studies where you take a group into a park, take a group into a city, and you just measure the difference, and the difference is consistent and it's profound. So I think for anyone that's not utilizing time exposed to nature in their practice, they should just research it and realize that it's basically a free, accessible tool for everyone with no side effects, and I mean a very minimal cost. I mean, you just got to get yourself to the park, right? So compared to most other medications or interventions, this is very scalable. and free. So, I mean, I really feel like it's the most underutilized health intervention that exists right now.
And stripping it back, like, we are nature. We're a part of it, and we've just become so disconnected and disassociated with our natural environment. It's almost baffling. It's when you take a step back and look at the bigger system, this style of living that we've created, it's insane if you really kind of boil it around. We've really closeted ourselves within four walls, within temperature controlled rooms with artificial light, and it just affects us so much psychologically, physically, emotionally, and that kind of deeper kind of
well, chemically. I mean, we are very chemically bonded to a diverse ecosystem, and when you're in a very sterile indoor environment around, I mean, obviously lead paint was bad, asbestos was bad, there's all these things in the built environment that we keep discovering are really bad for our health. Recirculated air, right? You're just not exposing yourself chemically to the things that we evolved or adapted to. So you're just in a weird environment for your physiology.
It's mind-boggling when you kind of think about it. And then we put ourselves in these boxes, and we really, from a a business, from a work perspective, from a coaching perspective, we want to be having conversations to create change and to feel safe and connected with ourselves, to be able to reflect and come up with different ways of improving ourselves or working with others. And so before we start to wrap up, is there anything that we've not touched on that you would like to share at all?
No, I think we've pretty much covered it. I mean, I guess I would implore your readers, if they don't go outside, to just try it once. I mean, most people really enjoy it. It's very addictive. And just be aware of how you feel after you've been outside versus inside all day. And I think we consistently find that people are just happier and they feel more refreshed, more focused. So, we've kind of lost that connection. So if you just implore people to try it, I mean, I don't want to say try it like it's a drug that, you try it once and you get addicted, but I do think that's often the case with time outside. People rediscover something that they just haven't been in contact with once they get into natural environments.
And that's what we find within the coaching world, when outdoor coaching, whether it's nature coaching, green coaching, eco coaching, however people are labeling it, branding it, it's not known as a possibility. So when you're potentially going to be working with a coach, and then there's the opportunity to actually, let's have conversations outdoors. There's a scale of different physical activity. It can be very sedate, just sitting in a park, or it can be going and running up a mountain, and everything in between. So it does come up to kind of creating that awareness and the opportunity within that. And I really think that the work that you're doing, bringing technology in, is a huge part of that. So thank you for everything that you are doing.
Well, thanks. I hope it becomes more commonplace. I mean, I would love, like, the healthcare systems, your insurance, your doctor to be prescribing nature. I mean, we're just starting, but I do see that as the future.
Yeah, I think there's pockets within the UK and the Peak District and in Australia that I've heard about. And again, it comes back full circle that we're having to actually have a prescription to go outside, which is something which is a part of us. But again, it's not. So where can our listeners find out more about your work and get in touch?
Yeah, so I guess the best place is our website. It's naturequant.com. And then, if you want updates on our activity, there's a little email sign up. For example, we will notify you when we turn on coverage of NatureDose in other countries there. And then we also have just a little blog with a bunch of our research articles and kind of some of the science behind a lot of what we're doing. For me personally, Jared Hanley, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm always excited to talk to people about different ways we can apply our technology. So please reach out.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And I'm sure that some of our listeners will be watching with great interest just to see where you go. And totally appreciate that this was a slightly different conversation to what we normally have for the listeners watching in. And what do you think? What are your thoughts around this? We would love to know. We're always curious as to your kind of key takeaways from listening in. And is there something that appeals to you, or actually is there something that you really don't believe should be done, or everything in between? So please do let us know. And as ever, thank you for taking the time to listen in to our conversation today. If you have not dipped into the treasure trove of episodes, they are up there on the website waiting to be discovered. We are in the process of wrapping up series 5 with series 6 imminently arriving. So do dip back and discover the array of guests that we have had in the past. And if you're not a member of our LinkedIn community already, please do join. We are over the 900 mark, rolling towards 1,000, and I'm sure we will have some celebration in store for that. But other than that, thank you so much for listening. Jared, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your expertise, and enjoy the rest of your day, wherever that may be. And I hope that it involves a little bit of time outside, immersed in high quality nature.
So if you enjoyed what you've heard, like it, share across your network, and subscribe to our YouTube channel and LinkedIn community page, the Coaching Outdoor Podcast.
Thanks so much in advance for your support.